My dear friends, the theme of light and darkness pervades the whole of the fourth Gospel. At the end of Mass we will have a reference to it again, because at the end we have the beginning, the first words of the Gospel. But even there is the drama between light and darkness. The sons of the dark do not receive the light. In Mel Gibson's film, The Passion, we have a very powerful bit of engineering of the film at the moment of the end, when precisely this drama between light and darkness is working itself out on a cosmic scale. We have, first of all, that regard of Jesus towards the good thief, a regard through his torture of tenderness, compassion, and what we might call plenary indulgence. Today you will be with me in paradise. And we have then that reaction of the other one, and how he, right to the end, perseveres in protesting against the dark and playing its game. And Mel Gibson has this moment of the departure of that poor soul. It goes down, down, into the bowels of the earth, and to welcome him is the Prince of Darkness. Very moving indeed, when placed right next to the moment at which that cosmic drama is concluded with the words, "It is accomplished," and the Lord, in full command, gives up the ghost, breathes his last, and goes on then into that realm from which he has returned. And the film suggests something of the majesty of God, because Christ has conquered and is at that point free from pain, and has freed us potentially from pain for all time to come and all eternity. Here in this hermitage we have a tiny part of the instrument of that redemption, because one of my best friends had access to it, having been responsible for the relics in one of the main churches in Rome. And they had to give one to a new foundation, but the foundation didn't work, so it was brought back, and it was big enough to get a tiny splinter from it and to give one to me and to one of the monks remaining from that foundation, and to keep one then back in the monastery where it had come from, the Abbadia monastery, where I go every year. And so we have it here, a link with that. And as we honour it, as we will, for a few seconds at the end, we are at the foot of Calvary, really. Because that instrument makes the demons cringe, we know that. It has, as the demon himself said once, his blood on it. And that blood washed the whole world. That same blood which in a few seconds will descend anew on the altar, where because of the separation of body and blood we have a mystical death. It's the same power of Calvary here. Hence the huge power that we have even in a small chapel. Calvary is happening here before our eyes, as it were. But I wanted just for a few seconds to pause on that question of the last moment and the light and the darkness that outworks itself at that point. I remember in Rome, the one who was teaching us to preach, he had been actually a Baptist, a Southern Baptist, and had grown up in that Bible belt where things were taken seriously. He became a Dominican and was giving us very good lectures on how to preach. And he insisted there should always be one visual aid or a story every time, because that's the bit that people carry away with them. And one day he was quoting us what he had done one time when preaching in a big church in America. He'd used his weekly allowance to buy a crystal vessel, and he took this with him into the pulpit, And before this full church he dangled it, precious as it was. This, my friends, is your immortal soul. Look how precious it is. But it is dangling. It's dangling over the abyss. And it only takes one moment of distraction of my two fingers for it to fall, for it to fall, for it to fall. And he opened them. Ah! What a waste. Yes, dear, what a waste of all eternity. And it was a point which no one would have forgotten, that we're carrying our immortal soul in our hands, and we can make a mess of all eternity with one moment of distraction. But I just want to give you another jog for your memory, the things that lead us to the other place. Now, the 7 deadly sins, so called because they work like cancer. They cause spiritual hardening of the interior life and eventually death. Now, can you remember some of them? Say one of them. Greed. Now, can you find one there amongst that lot? Pick one up. Good. Now, light it. Greed. Oh, pick up greed if you say. What is greed? It's going beyond the measure. Beyond the measure in money and food and things on the outside. And even actually spiritual greed. When things are even out of proportion, when we prefer our own well-being when we should be doing something else. It's quite elusive. One can be in ecstatic prayer and forgetting that one has duties at home. It's a spiritual greed. But the usual form of greed is actually far more obvious. And a good way is just to think of the person next to us. Now then, can you think of another one? Envy. Now, have a look. I'll light it for you if you have trouble. Bring it here. Envy. Now, what colour is that candle you picked up for envy? Green. Now, in Shakespeare, the great tragedy about jealousy and envy is Othello. And when it's all starting, beware, my lord, of jealousy. It is the green-eyed monster that mocks the bone it feeds on. Often we mess up our own joy because we're jealous of other people's. But it's the same thing that the devil did at the beginning, because he was jealous. He didn't want other people coming into his glory, and he wants them with him in his place of perdition. Because he, in the first place, was owning his gifts as a bright angel. But once we own them, we lose them. Because we only own what we receive on loan. That is nothing at all. We have them just for the use. Any more can you think of? Sloth, that's it. Yeah. Now, sloth, have a look. Where can you find it? What colour is it?
White.
That's white. Now, the blissfulness of staying in bed or doing things which are more interesting than what has to be done. It doesn't really bode well for somebody when one starts life with that. And unfortunately, it's more common than we think, because it's more subtle. Nowadays, watching for long periods of time a screen, not just the television but internet, is a form of sloth, because homework is not being done. We're having a good time getting sucked into the screen. Sloth, it's not really doing what we should while we're here on earth. Can you think of another one? I'll do it. Anyone? Any more?
Wrath.
Wrath. Now, that's ira in Latin. Ire. Anger. Just the other day, in this chapel, I had 3 little children. Well, one was an adolescent, and one would be about 11, and one was a child younger than you. And that had been a very dramatic case of ire, anger, wrath. The father had lost it, as we say in Ireland. He got very, very angry indeed. And he'd actually got so angry that he started to beat his wife, and beat her so hard that she actually died. That was just a few days ago. And so I had here the children of that disaster. Just think the drama that's going to do. We were a bit afraid that actually it might not finish there, that he might actually commit suicide afterwards, but he didn't. It was actually quite dramatic. The Holy Spirit got through to him, and he came out himself with this: I won't commit suicide, because if I do, I'll go under. I want to do my penance here, even in prison, so that I can actually get to see my wife again. Actually, I loved her, but I lost it. So there he is, getting his act together in prison. But anger, once it's out of control, is a very, very dangerous demon. Always be in control of your emotions, and even words can be daggers. So think twice before launching them into the air. Any other?
Pride.
Pride! Now, that's linked with another one, isn't it? The green one. Now, the original sin of your man, Satan. I. Because he owned his gifts. But it's the same thing, isn't it? We're in the same game when we want people to just adore us. Thomas More has a passage somewhere in his writings where he describes the proud man. He's the one who thinks that the whole cosmos has nothing better to do than to sing an eternal sanctus around his head. But pride is usually more subtle. And pride actually sometimes is so subtle that we can't even notice it ourselves. E.g., we take the stage in conversation. We want to talk. It's a form of pride, isn't it? We don't let people talk. And so on it goes. Be careful, because if we catch it, it escapes us. And even actually humility can be proud. We're proud of being humble. Very dangerous. Pride is so subtle, it's all a participation in the other guy's original sin. Any other?
Gluttony.
Gluttony! Now, gluttony. We were talking one day about the situation in one part of the world. It's the Western world, the States out there, where even ordinary food has sugar in it. And people eat lots and lots and don't move around because everything is automated. So they grow rotund and they can't lose weight. It's easy to put on weight, but not easy to lose it. But gluttony is not a nice thing. It means that we don't honour our body. And it's important that we look after the temple of the Holy Spirit and don't put on weight. And don't also waste what the Lord has given us. Even smoking is a subtle form of gluttony because we're burning £20 notes. But gluttony is a very strange thing. Often people comfort eat. They're not happy, so they take it out on food. So one wants to go to the root cause. Gluttony. Now, one more I think, is it? What's the last one?
Lust.
Lust. Now, lust. Be careful of the goggle box. It feeds lust. And so does internet, the Google box. Because one now cannot watch live television as we were able to when we were children, even in children's hour, because you've got adverts coming in between, and there's not really much going on as regards censorship. And when it comes to films, whereas in the 60s the good classical films were good and clean, but now there's always some scene, and you can't really trust even an officially good film. There'll be something there. So be careful, shield your soul. Only watch what you know 100% to be very sure, and that is the best filter. But as time goes on, be careful of your eyes in general, because they're the portholes of the soul over the world, and things come in and they stay in the mind. So what goes in stays in and wreaks havoc. Good lad. So we'll come now to the altar of our God. But remember these things, you must burn them just as we're burning light by the relics of the Holy Cross, and not want to play with the one who is responsible for that cross. In other words, the one who messed us up, the other guy. Try now, as we come to Jesus, to remember he's feeling and hurting just as a friend would when we upset him. So let's promise now quietly not to collude with the enemy and burn forever these vicious, deadly bits of the other one.